I know what you're thinking. Who would willingly carry a Neanderthal fetus? Is that even possible? Well, I assure you, there are some that would. And for the most part, it is possible. With a lot of help. I was a student at the Ohio State University. I say was because, well, we'll get to that later. My area of study was biology. The mechanisms of life fascinate me. Always have. I love the intricacies of how living forms work. I guess that's what caught the attention of a secretive group I had never taken much notice of. The group was older than me by a lot. I had just turned 19, but the youngest of the group was easily 35. Not exactly the normal college type. But one of them, Emma, had approached me after a field trip to a local pond. I had just walked away from my professor and nearly bumped her as I turned around. She smiled, a white, toothy smile. Her green eyes locked on mine as a gentle breeze made her frizzy brown hair poof slightly. It's no problem. I'm Emma. You're Lynn, right? I nodded. She smiled again. To tell the truth, it was a little unnerving. Predatory almost. Emma nodded toward the group walking back toward the parking lot. My friends and I were wondering if you'd like to join our research group. We have our own private laboratory. I felt a weird rush of emotions. I was slightly uncomfortable, but at the same time, I'd never been offered the chance to work in a private lab, let alone a group of people who were actually interested in the work. Emma laughed, cocking her head as she shrugged. I know, I must look insane. I mean, you don't even know me and I'm asking you to come to some random lab. But my group genuinely loves to learn and experiment, and you really seem like you fit in perfect with us. How about this? We have a bit of info that we haven't shared with anyone outside our group yet. Come to our meeting tonight. We can discuss it with you. You can get to know us a little bit, decide if you'd like to join us or not. Sound good? I was flabbergasted. But what could it hurt? I nodded. Sure, where and what time? Emma bounced with excitement. Great, 7 p.m. Just meet me here. I'll show you from there. Without another word, she jogged toward her group. I watched from where I stood. She was very animated in her speaking manner, her gestures slightly exaggerated. The rest of her group seemed to share in the joy of my answer. Shaking my head with a slight smile, I started back for my apartment. They must have as many friends as I do. I came back to the waiting spot early, unsure of what to do with myself. I didn't have a smartphone to keep myself occupied, just a shitty little flip phone. I resigned myself to watching the ducks as they lazily floated around. I must have been entranced because a small hand on my shoulder nearly had me out of my skin. Emma laughed softly. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were so deep in thought. I laughed embarrassedly. No, you're fine. Ducks must have been pretty fascinating. She stood up straight, starting to turn. Ready? I stood as well, dusting myself off. Ready as I'll ever be. She began walking. It's a few blocks from here. As we walked, I grew confused. While we were on campus still, we were going to the residential section. Apartments and centuries-old houses. There were no laboratories in the section. Are you sure we're going the right way? She nodded, picking up her pace as she glanced at street signs. Yes, it's not in the main campus. Turning down the street, we stopped at a large Victorian house. Fear slid up my spine icily. It's in a house? Emma stood up the steps confidently. No, but our meeting is taking place here. I stood in place. I thought we were going to a private lab. She looked over her shoulder, slightly impatient. I said we have one. I didn't say we were meeting in it tonight, just that we were having a meeting. I took a breath and followed her. The house was immaculate, although plain. No pictures or paintings adorned the white walls. No carpets covered the wooden floor. The couches were just basic brown, 4 of them in the massive sitting room. All of them were full of people. and all eyes were on me. I swallowed hard. Hello. Emma led me to an empty seat next to an older man. This is Dr. Alexander Lin. He's got a huge announcement tonight that could mean a huge leap in understanding humanity. My interest was instantly piqued. Oh, I prepared myself to be let down. Many people had made this claim, but few could back it up. Dr. Alexander cleared his throat. He was likely in his 60s, with thin gray hair and round, wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple gray suit. Looking at me, he smiled. Since our special guest is here, I'll begin. He stood, pacing the room slowly. As he spoke, he used his hands to emphasize his speech. For many years, I have been researching our ancestors, as well as our distant cousins, so to speak. Actually, the entirety of my career. I wanted to be the one who discovered the missing link. You know how that goes. Anyway, I was part of an archaeological team that was recently on a dig in Africa. We had been searching in an underground cavern when we happened upon a spot full of what looked like to be mud. Since we had come across nothing the whole day, we figured we may as well see if it was holding anything. And it was. It was concealing a scientific miracle. One of my younger colleagues stepped into it to test the depth. We were all fully prepared to pull her out if need be. It reached just past her waist. After feeling around for more than an hour, we were ready to go, certain there was nothing there. But she bumped something. We pulled her out, holding on to whatever she'd found. He paused, looking at me. Of course, I was hooked. I watched him expectantly, literally on the edge of my seat. He smirked. From that muck, we pulled a large object wrapped in petrified animal skins. A dozen at least, completely sealed. So we took it back to our mobile lab. Excitement didn't even begin to cover what we were feeling. The skins were too bound together to easily separate, so we cut through them. We were greeted with the remains of a Neanderthal. The skull gave it away instantly, but whomever wrapped him made it so he didn't decompose. We were in possession of a caveman who looked like he had died the day before. It was miraculous. His hair was intact, his skin soft. He looked to be under 20 years, but I never got the chance to research him further. We had a rat amongst our group, and it became apparent that more powerful people were coming to get him. So I did what I could. I took blood, hair, a finger, and other samples. That way, I could study him without worry. And I did, as soon as I came back to my own personal lab. Which brought me to this possibly groundbreaking experiment. He stopped again. Everyone was hanging on his words. I was amazed. I'd never heard of anything like this. It seemed improbable, impossible. I spoke, my voice more timid than I had expected. What experiment, Dr. Alexander? He smiled at me. It reminded me of Emma's. Predatory. It's very exciting, Lynn. We are going to create a Neanderthal. Hopefully, with your help. My brain tried to puzzle the pieces together. Not sure I understand. I mean, even if we could legally clone, the DNA is unusable. It's too old. How would it be possible? He went back to his seat. I took marrow from the finger I had cut off, as well as semen I had acquired from him. I had to do some major tweaking, and a few other unethical things, but the end result was successful. I have live sperm from the Neanderthal. It's in my laboratory. I was floored. I still couldn't process. Live sperm? You're going to try to test tube a Neanderthal? He shook his head. No. I intend to inseminate a healthy young woman with it. An intelligent one. That's why we brought you here. I choked. Me? Why me? You have plenty of women here in this group. Emma shook her head. Not good candidates. We're either too old or have health problems that will prevent a successful birth. You though, I researched you. Athlete all through school. Track, soccer, softball. You live a very healthy life. You're also young, and no genetic disorders in your bloodline that I could find. You are perfect. Just think about it. You could be the reason behind a whole new level of knowledge of our ancestors. Sure, we didn't exactly come from cavemen, but we could vastly expand what we know now. You would be world famous. A new Eve even. The mother of a new species. I didn't know what to say. This was hands down the most insane thing I had ever heard in my life. I started to get up to leave. I was in shock. Dr. Alexander put a hand on my arm. What if I make it worth your while? I can offer you several things. You will make money from this. You will become famous for this. If you carry to term, the new species will be named after you. Whether or not you carry to term, college will be paid for as long as you attend. You will not owe a dime. You will be provided better living conditions and will be given around-the-clock care. If anything goes wrong at any time, we will terminate the experiments so that you have no ill effects whatsoever. Scientific minds around the world will be lining up to speak to you. He stared at me expectantly. I still had doubts, but wasn't stupid. What he was offering was a good deal. Money, debt-free education, and worldwide fame. Plus the fallback of stopping the experiment if anything went wrong. I looked down, mulling it over. Nodding, I locked eyes with him. Put all of that in a legal agreement and sign it. And I'll do it. He sighed loudly in relief. Thank you, Lynn. You've made a world-changing decision. Project Eve will go as planned. I'll have the agreement to you by tomorrow. Emma will show you to my lab to sign it. I was shown to the door. While my heart pounded in excitement, it was also beating with trepidation. What had I just signed myself up for? The day after the meeting, I woke before dawn. I was still feeling incredibly uneasy. Part of me wished I had never gone with Emma, but my curiosity was weighing heavily on me, so much so that I barely slept at all. I had tried to imagine the outcome of Project Eve, what a prehistoric child would look like. They obviously didn't have eggs to implant in me, so the embryo would be half of me. Would it be capable of developing? The questions I had won me over. I couldn't stand it. I wasn't scared anymore. I had to know what would happen. Feeling around my nightstand, my fingertips brushed against my phone. I grabbed it and flipped it open, searching for Emma's number. I shot her a quick text and climbed out of bed. There was no chance of going back to sleep. Pulling a pair of sweats on, I flipped my coffee maker on. Moments later, the aromatic smell of it filled the room. I made myself a bagel as I waited for her reply. Luckily, I didn't have to wait long. As I brought my mug to my lips, the phone dinged. Opening it, I read it aloud. We'll be at your apartment in 20 minutes. Dr. Alexander is already waiting. Downing the coffee, I went to find appropriate clothes. An old pair of jeans and my favorite panic shirt would be fine for now. It was early fall, and the days were still fairly warm. I was shaking with anticipation by the time Emma finally pulled up. She was in an older Honda Civic, forest green in color. It had definitely seen better days, the clear coat on the roof and hood gone, allowing the paint under it to rust. She waved happily at me from under the hood of an oversized sweater. I opened the door, climbing in. She cocked her head. Aren't you cold? It's freezing out. I raised an eyebrow. It's like 70 out. It's not even a little chilly. Laughing to herself, she put the car in gear. I cringed a little when she missed, the grinding sound hurting my ears. She merely chuckled again and forced the shifter into place. 20 minutes later, we were well outside of campus, Actually, we were way out of Columbus, somewhere in farming country. Dread started to take over again. Where is this laboratory? She didn't look at me. The school gave him grants to build a bigger lab than he could manage on campus, so it was built at one of the satellite properties. We're almost there. As she said this, she pulled into a parking lot. The building resembled a doctor's office, with the smoked glass squares in place of regular windows. Putting the car in park, she undid her seatbelt. See? No creepy warehouse, just a normal lab. I smiled half-heartedly, feeling slightly guilty. I didn't realize my thoughts were written so clearly on my face. I followed her inside. We were greeted by a lounge, looking almost like a waiting room. There was a fridge in the back left corner, and a couple tables. Dr. Alexander smiled, standing up from one of the tables. Good morning, Lynn. I'm so glad to see you. If you'll have a seat right here, you can go over the legalities and decide if you're happy with them. As I sat down, Emma put a hand on my shoulder. Can I get you anything? Drink? Food? I shook my head as I opened the folder. No, thank you. I'm fine. Reading over the packet, it seemed simple enough. I would be making more money from this than I'd ever seen before. As promised, I would be supplied a large apartment outside of the city. It looked like I would have an entire medical staff to cater me at all times. If any medical anomaly would arise, Project Eve would be immediately terminated. Everything I had requested had been added in. As I reached the bottom, something caught my eye. I looked up. There's another woman in this? Dr. Alexander sat down, his face apologetic. Yes, I know you are healthy and capable, but I wanted to be absolutely sure the sample I created was viable. So another woman was brought in. She is slightly older and has given birth before. We know for certain that she is fertile, but as you see here, he pointed at a paragraph. It doesn't matter which one of you give birth, or even if you both do. All credit is going to you because you were the first to volunteer. I bit my lip, then shook any thoughts away. Science needed me. I picked the pen up from the table and signed next to his signature. He clasped his hands together happily. Wonderful. Let's get you downstairs. You can meet Jennifer, the second surrogate. A chill shook me at the mention of the word. Surrogate. I felt a little like a broodmare. We walked down a brightly lit hall to a set of stairs. The sterile smell of a hospital took over as we went down. The stairwell opened into a wide corridor that dead-ended a few meters away. There were 2 doors on each side. The first door on the right was open. A woman in her mid-20s was sitting on an examination table, reading a magazine. She had black hair that was naturally curly. She flipped lazily through the magazine, wearing nothing but a hospital gown. Dr. Alexander cleared his throat. She looked up, her eyes full of rich chocolate. She smiled. Hello, you must be Lynn. I've heard so much about you. I tried to smile in return. Yeah. She hopped down, coming to look at me. I didn't figure they would use someone with so many recessive genes for this project. Blue eyes are a recent mutation. I didn't take her observations as rude. They were just that, and they made sense to a point. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin were probably not possessed by early humans. I shrugged. My health and age must make up for it. She smiled warmly at me, shrugged, and went back to her magazine. Well, it doesn't hurt at all. Good luck. Dr. Alexander led me to the next room over. If you could be so kind as to change into the gown, we can have the procedure over in just a few moments. I'll need to keep you here for a few hours to relax. Then you can gather your things from your home for your new apartment. I nodded as he left, closing the door. I stripped down, slipping into the gown. This felt weird. I felt like I should be getting my ears and throat checked. He came back a few minutes later, holding a tube and a plastic syringe. Okay, let's begin. I was made to lie on my back, legs wide open in the stirrups. It felt odd to be displayed like this in front of anyone, let alone a man I hardly knew. I couldn't see what was going on, but could hear him rustling whatever he had around. His head popped into my line of sight. Okay, I'm going to insert the tube. It may feel a little odd. I nodded. I barely felt it as he worked. I tried to keep myself distracted as he worked, counting the ceiling tiles. Until I felt the cold spread inside of me. I had never felt cold in that particular area before, so it was incredibly weird to say the least. Moments later, he pulled the tubing out. Okay, all set. I'm going to leave you be, but I'm going to ask you to leave your legs in the stirrups for just a few minutes or so more. He walked out again, closing the door quietly. I ticked off the time in my head, itching to sit up. When I finally did, I got dressed. Guess there's no turning back now. Hopefully I don't get too attached to you. You're going to be one hell of a big deal. I patted my stomach softly. Cleaning out my apartment was incredibly easy. Turns out, I didn't own much, aside from my cat and a few old articles of clothing. Nevertheless, I had two strong-looking men helping me pack and carry my things out. I took a cab, following their moving truck to my new place. My new apartment wasn't really an apartment at all. It was a beautiful townhouse, probably an hour outside the city. There were a few others with it, but they didn't seem to be inhabited. A fenced-off garden surrounded most of the property. Climbing up a trellis near the door were several grapevines, each holding several fat bunches of grapes. I marveled at the entire scene as I exited the cab and headed to the front door. It was unlocked. Going in, I looked around in amazement. The apartment was large and beautifully decorated. A large, deep blue sectional sat against the far wall. Ornate tables were placed throughout the room. Across from the couch was a cherrywood entertainment center. It housed a larger flat-screen television and a couple of game systems. I wandered to the kitchen. It was completely modernized, with stainless steel appliances and marble countertops. The table was small, a two-chair cafe type made of wire and glass. There was a note on the counter. I picked it up and read it out loud. Good morning, Lynn. I hope you find the apartment to your liking. The garden is yours to do with what you want. Everything is really. Jennifer will be staying with you, so the two of you are not so isolated. She may be there before you, she may not. I'm not sure how long she will take. As per guidelines of Project Eve, you two must stay on the property for the duration of your pregnancies. You may order things and have them delivered, but you have to stay on the premises. There are working phones and internet here. You will want for nothing. If you have any kind of medical need, there is a black landline phone in every room. All you need to do is pick it up and you will receive help. I am meeting with your professors today to tell them about the trip abroad you are taking with me and my class out of the country. You will receive an A in every class. This is a guarantee. I will be speaking with you soon. Please relax. Make yourself at home. I put the paper down and looked around. The men had already unloaded my things and gone. I wondered if Jennifer was there. I went upstairs to look around. There were two large bathrooms, each holding a jacuzzi-type tub. Fluffy white towels were neatly folded and piled on a wire shelf. Moving through the first bathroom, it had a door that opened into a bedroom. Lush tan carpet covered the floor. The bed was large, a king size in a royal blue comforter. Next to it sat an antique dresser with a mirror attached. Across the wall was a small flat screen. I sat on the bed, letting out an involuntary moan. It was so soft, it felt like sitting on a giant pillow. This was my bed. I looked toward the door when I heard the door close downstairs. Getting up, I went to find the source of the noise. Jennifer had just walked in. I smiled. Hey, I guess we're roomies. She turned. Cool, this place is beautiful. I was expecting a dinky little apartment on the bad side of town. I shrugged. It's definitely nicer than where I was living. She walked into the kitchen, putting her bag down. I heard her pick up the paper. She called to me. I guess we're gonna get pretty bored, not being able to leave, huh? I chuckled, going to take a seat on the couch. Yeah, seems like it. The next month went by with little to no problems. I developed heartburn every now and again, something I'd never dealt with before. Nothing felt different. I started to question if the sample had failed. One morning, probably the third week in October, I woke up with an upset stomach. No, that's an understatement. I woke up feeling like I was about to vomit where I sat. Scrambling from the bed and falling to the floor, I did a bizarre crab-like run to the bathroom, hand clamped firmly over my mouth. I spent the next hour desperately clinging to the toilet as I puked everything inside of my body out. I thought I was dying. Between noisy bouts, I could hear Jennifer going through the same ordeal in her bathroom. Worried that I might be putting myself or what was inside of me in danger, I picked the black phone up off the hook and put it down. The medical team was there shortly after it all subsided. The woman who was apparently the ringleader had two men carry several things to my room. She smiled at me. "Since we're already here, I'm going to go ahead and check on you, okay?" I nodded sluggishly. I felt like death. She patted the bed as the men started putting things together. I laid down obediently, reveling in the softness. She sat down beside me and pulled my shirt up, tucking it under my bra. The man had been setting up a machine that was attached to a computer screen. One of them handed a wand-like device to her. She covered it in goo and pressed it to my stomach. I gasped when the cold jelly touched my skin. She laughed softly. "I'm sorry, I should have warmed that up for you." She went quiet as she looked at the screen. Well, looks like Project Eve is going off without a hitch. Look." I propped myself up on my elbows, looking at the screen. Amongst the black and gray, I saw a little blob. It was minuscule, barely detectable. The woman pointed a finger at it. "Look there, see that pulsing? That's the heart." I gaped at the scream in amazement. Dr. Alexander had done it. I watched the tiny heartbeat, my own picking up pace in excitement. The woman and her helpers packed everything up, making me promise to call if we needed anything. Pulling my shirt down, I went to Jennifer's room. She sat on her bed, face pale and eyes wide. She looked up at me. "Did they give you an ultrasound?" I nodded. "It was so cool. I saw the heartbeat and everything." She shook her head, her chin trembling. "It isn't right." I frowned, sitting next to her. "What do you mean? Is yours okay?" Her dark eyes bored into me. "Whatever is inside of us isn't right. It doesn't matter how ancient it is. It's not human. Not Neanderthal. I saw the ultrasound. I've been a surrogate 4 times. Month-old fetuses don't look like that. They aren't as developed as what was on the screen. They put something inhuman inside of us." My heart dropped to the floor. Maybe the screen just looked odd. I mean, our bodies won't carry a different species. It's not like we can be pregnant with a dog or something. She stood, pacing. "It's not right. It's not human." I swallowed hard. Part of me thought she was just crazy, possibly trying to back out of what she had signed for. The other half was terrified she was right. 2 extremely uneasy months had passed since our last meeting with the medical team. Jennifer had sealed herself in her room. I could sometimes hear her moving about, but she seemed to have gone mute. During this time, the morning sickness had progressed to the point where I would sit in bed for several hours after waking up, waiting for the nausea to subside. On what I calculated to be the beginning of my 3rd month of pregnancy, I awoke with no nausea. In its place was a ferocious hunger. I had never been so hungry in my entire life. My stomach growled angrily at me. I ripped the blankets off of me, heading for the door. I could hear Jennifer in her room, crying, but I didn't care at the moment. I had to sate my hunger. Opening the fridge door, I searched the contents. Leftover pizza, pasta from last night, and various other things. I scrunched my nose. None of this would satisfy me. A pack of red caught my eye. Pulling it out, I smiled. Steak. Closing the door and reaching for a pan, I tossed the package on the counter. There were 4 large cuts of meat. It made my stomach growl again. Moving quickly, I poured a little olive oil in the pan and tossed 2 of the steaks in. As the minutes ticked by, I tapped my foot impatiently. This was taking way too long. I glanced over at the remaining meat, my mouth watering. A bite couldn't hurt. I gingerly tore a piece off and smelled it. It smelled wonderful. I hesitantly placed it on my tongue. The taste was exquisite. Not bothering with a plate or even silverware, I picked up the steak and began biting into it, swallowing chunks whole. I had just finished the second raw piece and was reaching for the pan when a noise made me stop. I jerked my head in the direction it came from. Jennifer stood in the doorway, mouth agape. I wiped my mouth, looking down and away. I was really hungry. She didn't answer, turning on a heel and leaving. I looked down at myself, embarrassed. I had red splotches splattered all over my shirt and most likely my face. My hunger quelled for the moment. I decided on a bath. Making my way through the living room as quickly as I could manage, I went to the bathroom and locked the door. Stripping my filthy clothes off, I looked at myself in the mirror. My stomach had grown bigger almost overnight. I didn't remember it being that big. I turned to look at my profile. The swell started mid-ribcage and ended just above my pelvis. My belly button was almost flush with the surrounding skin. I frowned. I didn't know much about pregnancy, but I looked like I was in the 5 or 6 months range, not 3. I smirked. Despite the size, I found pregnant me adorable. I placed a hand on the top of my bump. To my surprise, the form inside me pushed against my hand. It moved slowly, almost like rolling over inside me. I gasped. I was excited. This was the first movement. I slipped into the bath, sighing in relief. The hot water felt fantastic. I laid back and closed my eyes in relaxation. They snapped open again when I received a hard kick to my ribs from the inside. I yelped in surprise and pain. Looking down, I saw my skin ripple. The bump moved from side to side. It felt like a sharp pain, like fingernails raking across my insides. Whimpering, I got out of the bath. I picked up the black phone as the pain worsened. My world went black. I woke up in bed. My head felt heavy. All of me felt heavy, actually. I struggled to open an eye, only to have it drift shut again. I could hear the woman from before. She sounded concerned. Dr. Alexander, it's developing at a faster rate than we had anticipated. This isn't how it's supposed to be happening. I suggest aborting Project Eve. It may very well kill her. Dr. Alexander's voice was no longer the cheery one I remembered. She will be fine. Jennifer is doing wonderfully. Lynn just needs time to adjust. This is her first pregnancy. Her body isn't used to it. The woman spoke again. The sonogram doesn't look right. The body isn't right. What did you do to the DNA? He hissed. Let me worry about what's inside of her. You just keep her alive. Project Eve goes as planned. Keep her sedated if you have to. I strained to listen to the rest of the conversation, but felt darkness taking over me again. When I woke again, I was alone. The room showed no sign previously being occupied. I sat up with renewed strength. Climbing out of bed, I went to Jennifer's door and knocked softly. Jen? She threw it open. Her eyes were red and puffy. What? I stepped into her room, sitting on her bed. Did the doctors come today? She sat at her desk. Yes. I looked over at her. What happened? She sniffed hard. If there's any Neanderthal in us, it's not much. Dr. Alexander put some kind of monstrosity in us. I cocked my head, What do you mean? Jennifer reached for her laptop. I've been researching it. He lured us in with that, but he lied. He said he got the specimen from a cave in Africa. Lynn, Neanderthals don't come from Africa. They were European. He didn't even care to make the story believable. He knew gullible women would jump at the chance to bring that kind of life into this century. I heard the doctor talking. She knows there's something wrong. She wanted to stop the project. Dr. Alexander wouldn't let her. My blood ran cold. I hadn't imagined anything. I bit my lip. So, what do we do? Jennifer looked me dead in the eye, her face full of malice. I'm getting whatever is inside of me out. I didn't get a chance to ask Jennifer to elaborate on what she had said. She turned and hurried toward her room. In the moment that it took me to shake the cobwebs loose and process what she said, she was already on the stairs. I called out, "Wait, what are you doing?" Rounding the corner to the stairs, I slipped and nearly tumbled. Righting myself, I bear crawled up the stairs. How the hell was she moving so fast? Reaching the top, I bent over to catch my breath. My head snapped up when the bedroom door slammed shut. I stood straight, placing a palm on my now aching back. Waddling down the hall, I knocked on her door. "Jennifer, what are you going to do?" I could hear her sobbing, hiccuping occasionally. "Go away, Lynn. I'm getting this thing out of my body." I winced. She sounded a little unhinged. "Okay, but we need help. We can call the doctor over. She said that the experiment needed to be stopped. You heard her." She screamed at the door. "No, she just wanted to stop the project. Dr. Alexander told her no, and she just fucking listened to him. They won't help us." I leaned against the door, putting my forehead against the cold wood. She was right. "Okay, but we still need help. We can't do this alone. It's too dangerous." I listened for a reply. Nothing. Moments later, I heard a new sound. Jennifer was still sobbing, but there was a wet sound and tearing. I heard her gasp in pain. My heart leaped into my throat, and I began beating on the door. "Jennifer, please stop whatever you're doing and let me in." I turned the knob, willing it to unlock. I beat until my hands ached, only stopping when I heard boots coming up the stairs. The doctor was rushing at me, accompanied by the two men I had seen before. One of them shouldered me out of the way, knocking me to the floor. Their boots did what my fists couldn't, splintering the door and busting it open. The three rushed in the now open mouth of the doorway. I raced up onto my elbows, taking in the scene before me. Jennifer was seated at her desk, her abdomen split wide open. She was digging through the layer of fat and muscle with her bare fingers. Just before the man reached her, she pulled something large and black from the slit. The sack surrounding it burst open, spilling its contents onto the floor. I caught a glimpse of it before the doctor scooped it up. The arms were long, too long. Skeletal thin fingers branched out from a large palm. The skin was either black or covered in dense fur. I couldn't tell. A long tail wrapped around the arm of the doctor as it was lifted. It screeched as the cold air hit it. I stared in horror. Jennifer was slung unceremoniously over her shoulder and packed down the stairs, whimpering and pleading the entire time. The doctor and the other man followed quickly, shielding whatever screaming monstrosity had just come into existence. As the commotion disappeared, I struggled to my feet. I went into panic mode. I couldn't wrap my head around what just happened. I began to cry, hyperventilating as I ran back down the stairs. What was I going to do? The place was obviously bugged. I don't know how I didn't realize it before. The form inside of me rolled, stretching as if it had just woken up. I felt nauseous. I didn't want that thing inside of me. But I couldn't do what Jennifer had done. I'd be sent off to my presumed death as well. Should I run? Comply with the doctors? I paced around the apartment, trying to come to a decision. I had never been this scared in my life. Going to the couch, I flopped down in exhaustion. Fat tears rolled down my cheeks as I rested my head against the back of the couch. I thought I could hear Jennifer, still pleading with him to let her die. Wait, no, I was actually hearing her. I could just barely make out her words, but I wasn't imagining it. Angling my head, I looked around. It was coming from the vent. I stood, pressing my ear against the wall. I could hear her more clearly. She was in the apartment next door. Looking around, I went to the patio door. I opened it, creeping into the backyard. Jennifer's voice was coming from the apartment to my left. Going to the patio door, I tried to peek in. No luck. The view was obscured by the blinds. I went to the kitchen window next. If I stood on tiptoe, I could just see in. The apartment was bare. No walls to separate the rooms. Jennifer was in the middle, strapped to a table. The doctor looked to be trying to repair the damage she had done to herself. The thing she had cut out of herself was nowhere inside. Jennifer was crying to the doctor, begging her to kill her. She didn't want to be in any more pain. The doctor didn't answer her, continuing her work. I put my hand on the windowsill to steady myself. To my horror, it snapped off. The doctor whipped around. I gasped, falling back. I stood as quickly as I could, looking at the surrounding landscape. I could see the buildings in the distance, probably half a mile away. I could make it. I took off running, almost managing a sprint. I had made it about 100 yards before the man began shouting at me. I didn't dare to look back. Too many horror movies as a child told me looking back meant death. I ran until I felt my lungs were going to give out, then pushed myself further. I began to pray when I heard the footsteps closing in on me. I heard a crack as my vision went black. I woke up with the worst headache I had ever experienced. I went to touch my head, but found my hand securely strapped to the frame of the bed I was in. I panicked. What the hell? Dr. Alexander came into my line of sight. He wore a slight grin. Well, good to see you finally awake. I hissed at him. What did you put in me? Where is Jennifer? I want it out of me. He held a hand up. One at a time, please. He pulled a chair up to my bedside. Jennifer caused damage to herself to such an extent that we were not able to save her. It was unfortunate. If we had been able to get her before she maimed herself, you wouldn't be in this position. I spat at him. What is inside of me? Get it out. He leaned back, chuckling. I told you, it's a miracle of science. No, it's not Neanderthal. It's a wonderful creation. So many DNA sources, so much splicing, years of work culminated into perfection, currently housed in your uterus. It's a masterpiece, a work of art. I realize you don't understand, but this is my life's work. I've tried it all over the world. Spain, France, Germany, all over Europe and Africa. But it never worked. Or I was found out before the birth and forced to euthanize my subject to avoid exposure. But this time, I think I've got it. You're far enough along. I can finally finish Project Eve. I sat back in bed, eyes welling. So, you're going to kill me too? It wasn't a question. I knew my fate. He laughed, leaning forward and lacing his fingers together. Of course not. You've done everything I've asked of you. You kept my precious little one safe. You will be free to go once it's born. And, as I promised, you will be paid very well. His smile faded as his voice took a deeper resonance. But, as per the disclosure part, I'm afraid I did lie about the scientific minds. You are not to speak to anyone about anything you have seen. At all. We won't seek legal retribution. But I have to explain to Jennifer's family that she disappeared while we were out exploring a new dig site. I'm sure many people have vanished the same way. He winked at me as I swallowed hard. But we won't have to worry about that now, will we? I shook my head. He stood up and stepped away from the chair. I've had them give you a generous dose of oxytocin. Contractions should begin in a few hours. I'm sorry to say that it's not going to be easy. No epidural, I'm afraid. Can't risk harming the very delicate life inside of you. After labor, my associate, Dr. Nichols, will be performing a small procedure on you. Just a little nip and tuck to get rid of the excess skin to remove evidence of your pregnancy. You'll be sore for a few weeks or so, then good to go. He patted my arm as he left the room. I closed my eyes as my entire body filled with dread. I didn't want to give birth to this monster. I must have drifted back to sleep, because I woke up feeling like my body was being torn apart. I screamed in pain. My stomach felt as if it was on fire and being ripped at the same time. Wetness surrounded my waist. Had I actually peed myself because of the pain? I sat up as far as I could. No, the blankets were wet with blood. I screamed again as another shock of pain washed over me. Dr. Alexander and the woman, now known as Dr. Nichols, came in. He smiled broadly. Looks like it's game time. Is the second incubator ready? Dr. Nichols put on a mask, nodding. She snapped a pair of gloves on, pulling the blanket away from me. Let's see how you're doing. I cried out as she checked me, her fingers freezing and painful. She looked at Dr. Alexander, shaking her head. She's not ready. She's at 5 centimeters. He crossed his arms. That's fine. I can wait a little longer. Although it was only hours, it seemed like days had passed as I lay writhing in pain on the bed. I begged them for relief, only to be answered in silence. Dr. Nichols finally checked me again. Finally, we're ready to push. I apologize, this is going to hurt worse, but I need you to push. Despite never having given birth before, instincts took over. I had no energy left to scream, only to grit my teeth and bear down. The pain was unimaginable. My body felt like it was tearing in half. All I could smell was copper. Dr. Nichols looked up at me, blood covering her arms all the way to the elbows. Keep going, you've got its head out. After the shoulders, it'll be a piece of cake. I pushed with everything I had. Blood actually sprayed at her from between my legs. I almost gagged. Suddenly, I felt much smaller. The pain didn't go away, but it did subside a little. Dr. Nichols moved backwards. What came out of me only somewhat resembled the one from Jennifer. It was the color of coffee that had been splashed with just a touch of milk. The fingers and arms were just as long, with equally long legs. It somewhat resembled a monkey, with great ape features, as well as several others I didn't recognize in any animals I'd seen before. This one wasn't screaming. I wondered for a moment if it was dead, until its eyes locked on mine. They were rounded almond shape, in a very distinct deep blue. A blue that matched my own. They were intelligent. It raised a hand-like paw to its mouth. I assumed the inch-long claws were behind the pain that had occurred. It yawned, mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, before closing its eyes. Dr. Nichols smiled. Say hello to Mama, Eve. I wanted to look away, but morbid fascination kept my eyes glued to it. Dr. Alexander stepped up to me, injecting something into my IV. Go ahead and take her to surgery. The two men came in and wheeled my bed out of the door. I came to my old apartment, sore as hell. I sat up in my bed, looking around. Everything was in its place. Standing, I doubled over in pain. I lifted my shirt. There was a series of small caps dotting my stomach in various places. I sat down, trying to think about what happened after I was taken from the room. I was wheeled down a hall, and then everything went black. No, that's not right. I heard someone talking. I strained my memory, then clamped my hand over my mouth. as I was being moved, I'd heard Jennifer. "Please, let me out. I can't do this again." This was all 3 years ago, this past September and October. No, I haven't told anyone of this. Yes, Jennifer was reported missing. I haven't seen Dr. Alexander since, or any of that weird group for that matter. The labs they had used were completely cleaned out, as well as the house. It's like they vanished off the face of the earth. They did by my silence, yes. I don't ever want to experience that again, and keeping my mouth shut is a good way to avoid it. I won't disclose how much, but I'll never have to work another day in my life. And I did graduate with all A's and debt-free, as promised. I got engaged to a great guy, and we're living together now. It's all been wonderful, until about 2 weeks ago. Despite being on birth control and using a condom, I got pregnant. Our first appointment is in a few days. My fiancé is over the moon because, due to an accident when he was younger, he was told he'd have trouble conceiving. I'm a little hesitant to go in. Wish me luck, guys.